Our government is currently wildly unpopular. Welcome to Law and Society. Please subscribe and let's talk about this briefly. First of all, I'm not really big on polls. There are polls coming out of everywhere with numbers that are everywhere, and I tend to go to Gallup if I am looking for polls and stories about approval ratings. Gallup has been accumulating poll numbers since the Truman administration, and while they are conservative in how they approach uh, the approval ratings and they don't really jump to conclusions, they come out with steady numbers that are reliable. So, in the references section, I provided you with a bunch of Gallup uh, articles and references that talks about how our government has declined in popularity over the last 25 years. Congress was rated in the upper 70s, 80s in 2000. 73%, 80% approval rating for Congress. Guess what Congress's rating is now? 15. 1 5. That is going from a solid B to not even registering on the I failed this test scale. And we have to ask ourselves, why do we keep electing members of Congress who do not do their jobs? In some ways, it makes us responsible because we go to the polling booth and click on the blue or the red or whatever other color you want to click on without thinking about what the purpose is of our voting. It is for our government to work properly. And clearly, over the last 25 years, what the American people have done is that we have repeatedly voted for or voted out and then voted in people that the general population does not approve of, especially as a whole, as a body, as a legislative branch of our government. We have a 15% approval rating, which clearly is an indication showing that our Congress isn't working the way it is supposed to. It is not providing the checks to the executive it needs to. It's not legislating on behalf of the people. It is not coming up with robust legislation for everything from healthcare to our environment, to the things that matter to the American people. Affordability. It's not stopping the executive branch from overreaching into the power of Congress's purse. Congress has the power of the purse. The spending power is Congress's power. And it has all been usurped by executive power, and it has been interpreted in a willy-nilly manner by a compromised Supreme Court. So we know now that Donald Trump's approval rating is at 36%. It's the lowest that he has been in his second term. And at 36%, when George W. Bush when he left office, his approval rating was 34%. And Bush came a long way because 9/11 and the government's response after 9/11 skyrocketed the president's approval rating to 89% because he started out in the 50s. And had 9/11 not happened, had the wars not happened, presidential approval rating wouldn't have shot up to 89% and then steadily come down for the next 8 years and rest at 34%. And if that is the case with George W. Bush's rating over time, where do you think Donald Trump is going to end up at the end of his 4 years if he's at 36% now? Unless he starts or manufactures a war and somehow gets MAGA Congress approval and authorization to go to war with Venezuela or whoever else that Donald Trump wants to go to war with. Then comes the Supreme Court. There was a time that the Supreme Court had a 70% approval rating, 25 years ago. That's not the case anymore. Half of Americans disapprove of how the Supreme Court is going about its business. And I suspect some of that has to do with the fact that the Supreme Court for the first time took away a fundamental right from the American people in Dobbs by overruling Roe versus Wade and saying that there's no fundamental constitutional right for a woman to choose whether or not to terminate a pregnancy. It is a choice right, it's a privacy right that the government takes away. The Supreme Court takes away from the American people. The Supreme Court has also ruled in Loper Bright to give itself, the judiciary, the interpretive power of regulations, as opposed to the Chevron deference that was created by the Supreme Court to give regulatory agencies the interpretive power of what those regulations meant, which takes away power from free enterprise and puts it in the hands of the judiciary. Takes power away from the legislatures making the laws and takes that power and puts it in the judiciary. And the Supreme Court, in its recent rulings over the last year, have shown that they, and even before that with the presidential immunity decision, has shown that they have no mooring, they have no grounding to the Constitution of the United States to begin with. Because presidential immunity is nowhere in the Constitution. But they came up with the highest form of presidential immunity they could find out of thin air. And this year, they have given this particular president leeway in equitable injunctions and equitable remedies in before trial, while trial is ongoing, in interlocutory appeals that we have not seen the Supreme Court do ever to this degree, this frequently. So the question that we as Americans need to ask ourselves is, why are we electing people to Congress who don't deserve to be there, who we have known for years and years and years are not working for the American people, but rather are working more and more for special interests? And that, I'm not talking just about MAGA, I'm talking about the entire Congress. So there must be something wrong with the collective body if it cannot oust from the body the elements that continue to hold it and not let it move forward. We as the American people need to have the foresight to elect a president who doesn't start out at 40% and keeps going down, or 45% and keeps going down, and does not do what the American people want, who has broken his promise to the American people over and over and over again, whether that be with cost of living not coming down, or it being tariffs which are causing an inflation, or it being the police state that he has implemented around the country and he continues to expand. I strongly believe we haven't seen the half of it yet. There's more coming. And we have a Supreme Court that acquiesces to this regime. So it's not a surprise that our government is currently wildly unpopular. It is not doing anything for the American people. It is eating itself away from within, gutting the government, and leaving the American people out to dry. And the American people are catching up to it. The question is, will we be able to catch up in time so that our republic doesn't grovel, so that our economy doesn't crash, so that our lives and livelihoods don't become that of countries that are developing as opposed to advanced economies where we were the leaders until this current administration came into office the first time, then there was a 4-year recovery, and then now the second time. So, with that said, keep that in mind, people. Look at the approval ratings. Ask why we have to keep voting for members of Congress who are not doing their jobs. Why do we keep voting for a president who doesn't do his job? Why do we stay quiet in the face of the Supreme Court ruling to distance itself from the rights of the people, to ingratiating itself to the interests of the powerful and the rich? These are all questions that we must ask ourselves as we prepare to vote during the midterms. Thank you for listening. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon.